In this lesson, I want to take you through all the tools and settings that you'll need for weight painting, as well as some of the ones that I don't think you'll ever need. Now, there's a lot in this video, but you're likely to find your favorite tools and your way of working with them. So treat all this information like a food buffet. It's all here, so take what you like and leave what you don't. After you've put all your grubby mitts all over it and slop it back onto the table, that is, like a buffet. Okay, are you ready? Let's go. So once again, we are looking at our trusty Suzanne monkey head. And for this demonstration, I already have this connected to our 3-bone armature here. You can see we've got some weight groups, etc. The first thing I want to show you is actually how we enter weight paint mode. Now there's many different ways of doing it. The old school way is by going up here and choosing the mode options up here and then going down to weight paint. And you can see my beautiful colors, I'm now in weight paint mode. Another way of doing that is bringing up the pie menu here. Now I've got that enabled with just by hitting the tab key. I think it is control tab by the default settings, but you can check the first video in this course, which goes through all the settings that I've changed. By bringing up the pie menu, I can change to all of the different modes that I need very, very quickly. So I can just hit tab and choose weight paint mode there. And once I'm in weight paint mode, I can choose my different vertex groups over here, and that will display the weights for those. What if I wanted to actually select and click on the bones to change them? Well, there's actually 2 different ways to get this to work inside Blender. So the first way, which is not the way that I do it, up here in the edit menu, you can see that the lock object modes is enabled. So if you have it set like this, what you need to do is select your armature, then shift select your mesh, and then jump into weight paint mode, and you'll be able to select those bones. And that only works if there is an armature modifier already attached to the rig, and it's obviously the same armature that you're selecting. Now, the way that I do it is I have this disabled by default. So when we have that disabled, all we need to do is make sure that we leave our armature in pose mode. So I have it selected. I'm going to jump into pose mode for my armature, and then I can just select my mesh. And it doesn't matter if I shift select or just select it. If I leave that armature in pose mode and then jump into weight paint, I can now select those bones. And that is because I have the lock object modes disabled. So the differences are, if you have the lock object modes enabled, you do need to shift select to select both of those objects and jump into weight paint mode. If you have it disabled like this, you need to leave the armature in pose mode before you select the mesh. All right, so let's have a look at our tools over here in weight paint mode. You can see we've got a few tools up here, the draw tool, blur, average, smear, gradient, and the sample weight picker. There's 2 little eyedroppers here. So the best way to think about these tools is that some of these tools can actually have brushes attached to them. So say, for example, this draw tool actually has all of these brushes available, where the gradient tool actually has no brushes, it's just a specific tool. Up here, you can see these are all our brush settings. That is also available in the properties panel over here, although it's a slightly different layout. You can see we've got the weight, which is going to be how much it actually paints. We've got the radius, which is the size of our brush, and the strength, which is multiplied by the weight to give us the final result. And then we have the options for the brush, the stroke, the fall off, and the way that the cursor is displayed. If we scrub over here, I'm just middle mouse and dragging, you can see some more options. We've got the symmetry over here. When you click on here, you've got the brush options. Just turn this one off for now, and I'll explain it in a moment. So everything that you find up here, you can also find down here, even though it's just a slightly different layout. Okay, so each one of these brushes is actually the same thing, it's just got a different type of blend mode. But all of these different blend modes you don't actually need for weight painting. There's only 2 that you really need, and that is add and subtract. Now, why are all these other ones here? And that is because the brush system is shared amongst many of the different modes in Blender. So even though these brushes are available in weight paint mode, they don't really work that well. As I said, the only ones that you'll use are the add and the subtract. Now, some people actually use the mix, they find it quite handy. So I'll show you those 3. Okay, so what does the add brush do? It's going to paint our weights based on our brush settings. Now we can change the weights up here. So now you can see it's not painting quite so much. The radius is obviously the size of our brush. You can see it's smaller. The strength is going to be a multiply by the weight. So what you might find yourself doing is having a high weight and a low strength, and then just painting over certain sections over and over to make it darker. See how I've accumulated the weight there? And these buttons here, like this one and this one, will enable the pressure sensitivity if you are using a tablet. If you're using a mouse, it's not going to have any effect at all. Now, there's actually keyboard shortcuts to be able to change these. If you hit the F key, that is going to change the size of your brush. If you hit Shift F, that is going to change the strength of your brush. Whereas if you move it to the right, it's going to increase. If you move it to the left, it's going to decrease. Now you can see we have a strength of 0. Just fix that. Let's just go back up to 1. And finally, Control F will change our weight. So now we have a weight of 0 or a weight of 1. So I would advise you to practice these hotkeys, F, Shift F, and Control F. Now, if you didn't want to memorize those buttons, you can actually bring up the context menu. Now, for me, I hit the W, and you can see we can enable these all in the one little pop-up menu there. But if you're using the default left-click select, then you'll just hit the right mouse button to bring up that context menu. But my suggestion would be to actually practice just using the F, Control F, and Shift F, because it will make you much faster. Now, if you don't want all of these brushes to show up for a particular tool, or the same thing over here, this is where that is repeated, you can actually disable them for weight paint mode. I'll just show you how to do that. So if we don't ever want to use our multiply brush, which we don't, we can just select it, then go to this menu here, and we can disable it or enable it in different modes, or attach it to different tools. But for what I'm going to do here is I'm going to disable it for weight paint mode. So no, that brush is not deleted, it just won't be available in weight paint mode anymore. Now I'm going to skip ahead and do the same thing for the other brushes that I don't need. And that leaves me with the Add, Subtract, and the Mix brush. Let's check out Subtract. What does this do? This does the exact opposite of the Add brush. Let's increase my strength and my weight. And subtract a weight of 1. Shrink it down, shoom. Just done a little bit of weight painting there. Now, the other brush that I've left is the Mix brush. Now, this is kind of like an add and a subtract in the one brush. Personally, I don't use it, but I know quite a lot of people do. So we can actually paint to whatever weight that we want. If the weight is set to 1, it's going to paint all those weights to whatever you have set here, so that it would be 1. If we want it to subtract and paint to a weight of 0, we can actually just make that 0 and then paint, and you can see it's an add and subtract brush all in one. But personally, I don't use this tool, so I am just going to disable it. So next, let me talk about the different fall-off settings. So up here in the fall-off menu, you can see that we have the fall-off shape of sphere or projected. If we hover over it, you'll get to see what the tooltip says. So this uses the brush influence in a sphere outwards from the center. Now, what does that mean? That means wherever this cursor hits the mesh, let's paint a weight of 1. Wherever this cursor hits the mesh, it's going to project outwards and use that fall-off setting, basing kind of like a 3D sphere from that point in space. Whereas if we change the fall-off to be projected, and then paint here, it's going to project from the view. So that center point is going to be 1, and going out to the end of the circle is going to be 0 based on our fall-off curve. Hopefully you get the distinction there. The sphere projects it from a sphere in 3D space, where projected projects it from the view plane, based on our custom fall-off here. And you can create your own fall-off curve by clicking and changing the points in the little window there, but I don't think that you'll ever need to do that for weight painting, because you can choose from some of the preset curves down here. Let me just show you what a constant looks like, so it should make sense. Anything that is within my brush gets painted 100%. Let me undo that and show you a different fall-off. Let's do sharp. You can see that there is a sharp change in the middle there. Let me show you the big difference between the sphere and projected fall-off shapes. So here I've got the sphere projection, and I'm just going to paint this, and then we'll have a look at what it's done. You can see it's only kind of painted on the front of our surface. But if we change this over to be projected, and then we just do the same thing on the other side, you can see that it's painted through our mesh. That is the main difference between those two modes there. However, we can actually change it from painting on the back using our projected here. If we go up to our brush here, you can see that we can enable front faces only. So now when we paint, it's only going to paint on the faces that are pointed towards our brush there. And we also have a similar setting down here, which is the front face fall off. We can actually change the value. So at the moment it's set to 80 degrees. Let's lower this down to say something like 20 degrees. If there's an angle of 20 degrees from where we brush, it won't actually paint on that. There you go. You can see I'm holding down my mouse and I'm only painting on that bit there. That is because of the angle setting and the first point at which it painted. That means it's only going to paint a face that is pointed under 20 degrees towards the view plane. Up here in the brush setting, the accumulate will let you paint over the same area and accumulate that weight. So let me just show you what that means. So I've got a weight of 1, and let's lower down the strength to 0.1. And with accumulate disabled, I can hold down my mouse and go over the same spot, it's not going to increase the weighting on that. I have to release my mouse button and paint again to increase the weights. It's a lot of clicking to increase the weights there. Now, if I enable this accumulate, I can hold down my mouse button and then just go over the same spot and increase the weights like that. It doesn't work by holding over the same spot. You need to move and come back over the same spot for it to increase. So painting it like that. Wax on, wax off, wax on, wax off. So now let's talk about some symmetry. Actually, I had to upgrade the version of Blender that I was recording on because in Blender 2.91 there is a little bit of a bug, but the fix that I'm going to show you is available from Blender 2.92, which is now currently available. Let me just go ahead and show you what I mean about symmetry. So up here we actually have some symmetry options for the mesh. We've got X, Y, and Z up here, and you can see that that was updating down here in our symmetry tab. And we also have vertex group X and topology mirror. Now these are used for different things. Let me show you what we would use vertex group X for. In this example, we have ear.L and ear.R. And if I make some changes to the left side, I want that to also apply to the right side. I'll just make a silly brush here. And when I jump over to the right side, you can see that that has actually updated the other side. And that's what this option here does. Let me just undo that. Now this topology mirror will try and do the same thing even if the topology is not in exactly the same spot. So for that, let me just show you. I'm just going to grab these verts here, drag them out. So now both of these sides are different. If we go back to weight paint mode, and I paint here on our mesh, and then we jump over to our ear.R, and you can see that it's managed to figure out where those mirrored vertices are for the selection that I moved. However, I didn't do a very good job on the eyeball, which is really, it shouldn't have a problem with. So to be honest, I've always found that this option is a little bit temperamental. Sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't. So if I'm having an issue with this type of thing, I usually just toggle that option on and off and see which way gives me the best results. So just reset back a few steps and then show you the other type of mirroring, which will be the mirror X here. So the mirror X will actually just paint it on the other side of the mesh. So if I paint that side, it's actually applying it to the other side of the mesh. Now this is not something that you want to do for say ear.L, but let me undo that. But it is something that you might want to do on say the main part here, which should be symmetrical on both sides. So let me just subtract some weights, make sure that we got the mirror on. Now if I subtract it from this side, symmetry option will do the same thing to the other side. I didn't actually need those ones enabled, they just re-enabled themselves when I hit undo. So that should make sense about the two different uses. You want to mirror on the X side when you want the changes to be part of that same group, and you want to mirror the vertex group when you want it to be applied to, say, the .R side. All right, so let's look at a few more tool options for this weight paint mode. So the next one that is super handy is auto normalize. So actually, I'll just disable this and show you what I mean. So when we paint our weights, let's just paint that in there. So when we paint this weight without this enabled, Blender will show us the weights that aren't actually normalized. So if we click here, you'll see that this is 100% or red to the ear, but I have just also painted it 100% to the head here. This means that the visual feedback is incorrect. We grab this here and you'll see it's not deforming the way that we expect. So if you have auto normalize enabled when you paint, it's going to update or auto normalize those strokes as you do it. So for example, let's just fix this here, or just paint that. You'll notice, and you'll think what happened, but if I go back, you'll see that I've fixed it here. If I paint over here, and then click on our ear, those weights have been subtracted from our ear. And that's what the auto normalize function does. Now, the reason this is not enabled by default is because it's a very powerful option and it's technically changing the weights of more than just the active group. But as long as you're fully aware of this before you turn it on, it is something that I think you should start getting used to as early as possible. Yes, you're probably going to make a few errors and normalize a group that you didn't mean to, but that's all part of learning. I really think having this option enabled will actually outweigh the cons of always having to go to the weights menu and normalize things manually, because you really need to see the weights at their true value when you're weight painting for deformation. So the next option is lock relative. Now for this, I'll need to explain how locking works. I've already shown you how you can lock our groups over here, and you can see that that is updating the color of our bone. So say red, meaning it's locked. You cannot actually edit the weights. So you can lock them with these little padlocks over here, but the shortcut in the viewport is to press the K button. And this will give you the pie menu with a whole bunch of options. You can say, let's say lock only selected. So now I have that one locked. So now if I try and paint on that, it's not going to do anything. You can see active group is locked, aborting. If I try and paint on the head with the auto normalize, it's not going to work because we can't adjust the values of this bone here because it's locked. So that's how the locking works. Now this lock relative option, when you enable this, it's just going to change the way that our weights display. Let's just hover over this one and read the tooltip. You can see it's going to display the bone deforming groups as if the locked groups were deleted and the remaining ones were renormalized. So what that means is because this bone is locked, it's going to say it doesn't exist, and any of the weights are going to be visually normalized. And you can see that our group goes all the way over here. Even though this might be a weight of say 0, it's going to normalize all the way up to 1. So this lock relative option, I don't actually use it at all, to tell you the truth, but it's going to change the way it visually displays. Now the multi-paint option here will let you select and paint the weights of more than one bone at once. From the tooltip, you'll see it's meant to maintain their relative influence. Now this is not an option that I use all that often, but if you combine it with the auto normalize button there, you can actually see the full influence of those weights. And you can see this one here, it's a little bit lighter here. So I can actually just paint across there and fix it. But it can be helpful to see the influence of all the bones that you have selected there. Now let's talk about how we can restrict the painting to certain areas of your mesh. Well, the most obvious way is by clicking this option down here. And with this enabled, it will not let you paint on any vertices that are not part of that group. Now let's just jump over into edit mode and have a look here. Let's just select all the verts that are part of this group here, ear.l, and you can see that everyone is a member, even if it has a weight of 0. So let me just quickly remove some verts. So I'll just select these ones here and then say remove from that group. And then when we jump back into weight paint mode and have this enabled, if we try and paint on anything that wasn't part of that group, over here it's not actually going to work. These verts over here were part of the group, so I can actually edit those ones. So that's what this restrict button does. It'll let you paint on anything that is not a member of the group. Now I've just had to jump back into an older version of Blender so that my screencast keys will work for this next section. And the one thing that you'll notice is that this options menu has a few more extra things. And that's just because these options here have moved to the symmetry in later versions of Blender. This is Blender 2.1, but from Blender 2.2, these options show up here. Anyway, now that I've covered that, I want to talk about how we can actually mask where we actually want to do our painting other than using this restrict function here. Up here, we have these two buttons, and this will be our masking. So this will mask the faces, and we can select the faces that we want to paint on, and this will do the same thing for the vertices. So they work exactly the same way. Anything that is light means it's not selected, so we can actually just hit the A key to select all or deselect everything. Then I'll just hold Control and lasso select the faces that we want. And let's just say I only want to maintain the painting here. Let's do some painting. Let's add. I can't add anything over here, but I can on these faces that are selected. And this will be the same. If we jump over into the vertex masking, you can see that those vertices are selected. And you can only paint on those selected ones. We can deselect some if we want. So if I hold down Control and Shift and then lasso select, I have deselected them. Might be easier. I'll just jump over to masking so you can see. Let's Control click these ones. Control lasso selecting will add them. And if you hold down Shift and Control, that will remove them. In my opinion, this is a much better way of restricting where you want to paint than using this restrict function over here. That is a whole bunch of options and settings explained. Now let's get back to some of the remaining tools. You've seen the draw tool, but let's have a look at this blur tool. So the blur brush is really handy to create a nice gradient or smooth the flow between whatever is under your cursor. So let me skip ahead and put some random weights on the head here and show you how to blur it with the blur tool. You can see what it's done there. It has smoothed it out. You'll use this tool a lot where the joints meet. It is excellent. But you'll see this in action later. Now the average tool over here is a little bit like the blur tool, but it's on steroids. What it will do, it will average out all of the weights that are under our cursor here. So, I mean, you can use it for a little bit of blurring, like heavy duty blurring, but you'll notice if I use it in something like on this area here, it doesn't really create that smooth transition, it's just going to average out all of the weights. So everything under that cursor moves closer to a single value rather than a smooth transition. Whereas with the blur tool, everything will transition or smooth itself out based on the surrounding weights. I dare say you won't find yourself using the average tool at all. Now, the smear tool. I like to use this one when you want to smear or push the weights from one section to another. So what I mean by that is, if I want this area to get a little bit of influence, I can drag it from the red over there to smear it in that direction, and then I can kind of blur it out. That's what I use this tool for. And I can also go in the reverse direction. So if I want to drag some of these 0% weights this direction, I can drag it that way. So this is a tool that I find quite handy just to quickly nudge certain weights in a direction, and then I can smooth it out. Now the gradient tool is another one that I don't think you'll use all that often, but with this tool we can actually create a gradient from 0 to 1 in whatever direction that we want. So here you can see that I can create a nice smooth fall off. Most of the time it's a little bit tricky to get it to do what you want. So there I've just kind of created a little bit of a gradient from 1 to 0, and we can actually do this in whatever direction that we want. So here, do a gradient in this direction. Just undo that one. And there's actually two different modes. We can either go in a linear or radial. So the radial will go outwards from the point that you select, where if you go linear, it's obviously going to be a linear gradient. However, as I said, it's a little bit tricky to find good situations where this tool is actually handy. I think you'll find some of the other tools much more versatile. Now the next tool here, or tools I should say, are the sample weight and the sample vertex group. I'll take a look at the sample vertex group first, because that actually works without any errors, whereas the other one doesn't work very well when you're using the armature modifier. The sample group tool will let me click anywhere, and wherever my mouse is, it will detect all of the vertex groups that vert is a part of, and it will let me choose which one that we want. So at the moment I have ear.l selected, so if I choose this one, you'll notice that it has selected over there. So that's what that tool does. We can click over here and say, oh no, I want to choose the main body there. So it's an alternate way of selecting which vertex group that you want to be active. Now the other one here is sample weight. And this one doesn't work very well with the armature modifier. And you notice if I click, you get this warning here. The modifier used does not support deformed locations. So how do we actually use this tool? Well, I think it's easier to actually enable one of the other tools and then use the shortcut to temporarily enable this tool. So I have the draw tool enabled, and if I hold down the control key, in the bottom left there, you see it says weight paint sample group. And then in the top of my tool, you can see that the weight is 0. If I click here a couple of times, you'll notice that it then updates and says, okay, I want that weight to be 1. It's changed my weight to 1. And if I click here where the weight is 0, probably get the error message a couple of times. Click again, click again, click again. Oh, there we go. It worked that time. So you see, it's changed my weight to 0. What it's actually doing is complaining about these modifiers here. So if I disable that and then click them again, you'll see how it works. Change the weight to 0, change the weight to 1, or anywhere in between. So you can see that this tool is not actually useful when we're painting for deformation. Now, there's just a few more little shortcuts that I want to explain to you, and that is how to temporarily change over to the sampling the weights or the gradient tool. So you just saw how I could hold down the control key and sample the weight paint. If I hold down the shift key, you can see that it says weight paint sample group. So that's temporarily going to change my tool to be this one here. So I can actually choose the left ear if I like, or I can choose the right ear. So whatever vertex is under my mouse, when I click this, I can actually change the active vertex group. And if I temporarily want to enable the gradient tool for whatever strange reason, I can hold down the Alt key and make sure my weights are 1. And then I can create a gradient as expected. Okay, so that's everything I wanted to show you in this video, and congratulations on making it all the way. Now, I don't expect you to memorize all this stuff. There's probably a bunch of settings and tools that you'll never use, but someone else might swear by them. So practice everything and then see what works for you. In the next video, I'll show you some weight painting in action, as well as give you some handy tips. I'll see you there.